The response to the COVID crisis caused unparalleled collateral damage. Isolation. Families and whistleblowing carers have told us about residents being isolated in their rooms for days and weeks on end, with absolutely minimal contact with other humans. By isolating care home residents from family, a vital layer of care stopped. Family members would no longer be able to help with day-to-day visits and tasks, including personal care and mealtimes. Natural safeguarding checks that comes with regular family visits also ceased. No GP visits. Our families and whistleblowers evidence that the majority of care homes did not have any GP visits for extended periods of time during the pandemic, in some cases up to several years. Neglect, malnutrition and dehydration. Residents denied food, water, care and basic hygiene. Untreated urinary tract infections, pressure sores and skin ulcers, all prevalent during lockdown and all a breach of the Human Rights Act. No access to medication or medical care. Access to medication and medical care was limited due to no in-person GP visits and also DNA do not admit to hospital. This very discriminatory policy encouraged that residents with dementia and other cognitive impairments be restricted access to emergency and in-hospital care, often with devastating or deadly effect. The NHS frailty score can stack the odds against you if you're older or showing signs of frailty. If implemented strictly as an assessment tool, it can mean that you are faced with a fight for simple medical treatment. People over age 70 with a comorbidity or disability would not only be denied medical care, they would often be placed on end-of-life medication if they presented with COVID symptoms. DNR and DNA CPR. During the pandemic, extensive testimonies from families and whistleblowers evidenced that inappropriate and at times unlawful use of end-of-life protocols in care homes and hospitals. These accounts align with reports from other campaign groups and have been corroborated by relatives and care staff at the Scottish COVID Inquiry. NG 165. Denial of antibiotics and the initiation of end-of-life pathways. This suggests that some care home residents presenting with respiratory symptoms in early 2020 should have been treated with antibiotics for their illness, as was standard practice. However, during lockdown, long-standing best practice in the treatment of respiratory illness was largely abandoned. NICE guideline NG 165 advised against the use of antibiotics where COVID was suspected. However, with GPs carrying out remote diagnosis, how were they able to tell the difference between COVID and a case of bacterial pneumonia or a chest infection? They couldn't. Yet countless numbers of patients were denied basic yet life-saving treatment such as antibiotics and steroids through this practice.
I have no responsibility.
How many people died needlessly
pandemic
from untreated bacterial pneumonia, only to be recorded as another false COVID death? Another mechanism used to check this. How many people died needlessly from a chest infection? They couldn't. Yet countless numbers of patients were denied basic yet life-saving treatment such as antibiotics and steroids through this. How were they able to tell the difference between COVID and a case of bacterial pneumonia or a chest infection? NICE guideline NG 165 advised against the use of antibiotics where COVID was suspected. However, with GPs carrying out remote diagnosis, how were they able to tell the difference between COVID and a case of bacterial pneumonia or a chest infection? They couldn't. Long-standing best practice in the treatment of respiratory illness was largely abandoned. NICE guideline NG 165 advised against the use of antibiotics where COVID was suspected. However, with GPs carrying out remote diagnosis, how were they able to tell the difference between COVID and a case of bacterial pneumonia or a chest infection. They couldn't, yet countless numbers of patients were denied basic yet life-saving treatment such as antibiotics and steroids through this practice. How many people died needlessly from untreated bacterial pneumonia, only to be recorded as another false COVID death? Another mechanism used to justify ceilings of care and the initiation of end-of-life pathways was the unlawful use of do not attempt resuscitation orders. It is now very well known that across many, if not all, care settings, these were placed on residents' medical notes in a blanket fashion, often without discussion with families, or with families put under considerable pressure to agree to the DNAR order. Those who suffered from cognitive conditions or impairment were particularly at risk, regardless of their age and wider health. A Freedom of Information request confirmed that 90% of COVID deaths had had a DNAR order in place. Did the patient consent? Were the families consulted? The DNAR order meant much more than withdrawal of resuscitation. It also triggered, along with the NHS Frailty Score Index, a high-level triage system of denied medical care for any condition. NG 163. NICE guideline NG 163 was issued on the 3rd of April 2020 and provided recommendations for managing symptoms, including end-of-life care for COVID-19 patients. This guidance had a significant impact on the prescribing of end-of-life medications, midazolam and morphine together. One of my own graphs here, even making its way into the UK COVID inquiry. NG 163 advised midazolam to manage agitation or distress in patients suspected of having COVID. A dose of 2.5 to 5 milligrams every 2 to 4 hours as required, a huge volume of midazolam. Morphine was recommended for managing severe pain and breathlessness in COVID-19 patients. NG 163 also emphasised that sedation and opioid use should not be withheld due to fear of causing respiratory depression. It is important to note that prior to the COVID era and breathlessness in COVID-19, 5 milligrams every 3 medications, midazolam and morphine together. One of my own graphs here, even making its way into the UK COVID inquiry. NG 163 advised midazolam to manage agitation or distress in patients suspected of having COVID. A dose of 2.5 to 5 milligrams every 2 to 4 hours as required, a huge volume of midazolam. Morphine was recommended for managing severe pain and breathlessness in COVID-19 patients. NG 163 also emphasised that sedation and opioid use should not be withheld due to fear of causing respiratory depression. It is important to note that prior to the COVID era, the combination of midazolam and morphine was not usually authorised for use together for respiratory illnesses. Midazolam is a benzodiazepine used for sedation, while morphine is an opioid used mainly for pain relief. When used together, they can cause significant sedation and respiratory depression, which can be dangerous and lead to death. Their combined use is, therefore, considered off-label for respiratory illness and instead used for sedation, while morphine is not usually authorised for use together for respiratory illnesses. Midazolam is a benzodiazepine used for sedation, while morphine is an opioid used mainly for pain relief. When used together, they can cause significant sedation and respiratory depression, which can be dangerous and lead to death. Their combined use is, therefore, considered off-label for respiratory illness and instead they are used in palliative care settings to manage symptoms at the end of life, not given as a treatment for someone who is hoped will recover from illness. The fact that NG163 recommended those drugs together for the treatment of COVID, particularly alongside the midazolam dosage used, raises very serious concerns. Medical professionals raised these concerns about the use and abuse of NG163 very early on, including a high-profile letter to the British Medical Journal in May 2020 by 11 eminent doctors, including specialist palliative care consultants. NG163, introduced in April 2020, would be replaced by the much diluted NG191 in March 2021. In less than 1 year of NG163 being in place, UK care homes suffered 50,000 excess deaths, the majority of which during the first lockdown, where excess death levels through April 2020 exceeded 100%, a literal doubling of deaths. For those that claim those deaths were caused by COVID, a question I ask is why were there no excess deaths before lockdown, where in fact care homes had negative excess deaths in January, February and early March 2020. We then had the immediate spike in excess that accompanied the lockdown and the introduction of end-of-life protocol NG163. Then again, after the lockdown ended and family were allowed to visit relatives in care once again, the death levels in care homes once again went back to lower than average levels for the rest of 2020, only jumping back into excess after the COVID-19 vaccine was rolled out, with care homes amongst priority 1 targets by the JCVI. NG191 removed all reference to giving midazolam and morphine together. NG163 was wiped from the NICE archives. Why? What do they have to hide? Is it 50,000 avoidable deaths caused by their treatment protocols? Thanks for listening, guys. See you later.
The doctor said, we don't take COVID-positive residents to hospital. Order the end-of-life pack.
We've picked up the antibiotics. I need the oxygen. I need it ASAP because our oxygen levels are dropping down. And she prescribed end-of-life drugs. And we never, ever got the oxygen, ever. They had all had DNRs in place.
And was there, to your knowledge, any consultation with the patient or their families?
No. We found that ambulance drivers and paramedics were not happy to transport any patients to hospital if that needs, like when that lady fell, unless there was a DNR in place. Okay. And I'd never come across that before.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. This is Gigaohm Biological. 2 recommended Substacks there on the screen. Pretty heavy video. I hope you don't think that I was making fun or making light of it by putting in the sound effects. That's why I went back a couple times and replayed it without. It's just shocking, really, if you think about it, because we've been saying it for a long time here. On this broadcast, I just like to make you aware that the 31st of August, 2025 is International Overdose Awareness Day. I'm going to put in the chat a little link here where you can download some social media stuff and, stuff you might want to print out or whatever. And I want you to be aware of it, because I do think that one of the sources of this murder and lies here, besides the pneumonia, besides what you heard in that testimony from Scotland, all the different ways that old people and people that were expected to contribute to an all-cause mortality rise could have been prematurely let go and roped into this narrative of COVID that in other countries was used against them. Look at America. Look at the failing numbers in America. And that's what justified the lockdown in Australia and New Zealand. That's what justified the interpretation that they weren't experiencing the first wave that we had because they locked down. That whole narrative would have only been possible with this complicated, sophisticated murder and lies that included in America an opioid epidemic that was allowed to go out of control starting in really 2019. But also, if you were listening carefully, you could hear in that Scottish inquiry that there was actually a decrease in all-cause mortality right before the pandemic. And I think we can see that potentially in a lot of places in America as well, where, from, let's say, November 2019 until January, February of 2020, they were doing pretty good with all the people in old folks' homes and all the people in the hospitals, making sure that there was no, they did the best things they could. And then they announced the pandemic, and then that treatment changed. And so suddenly we had this rise, just like in Scotland. That's not possible because an RNA has a furin cleavage site, and then therefore, unlike typical RNAs, this one starts to transmit at light speed. That's not an explanation that is founded in reality. An explanation that is founded in reality is that synchronously across Western nations, a protocol set, very diverse one, was released. And that protocol set, combined with the fact that all the old doctors were sent home because it's not safe for you to work here anymore, and these residents were told what to do, especially in America, by their administrators, or even by an email or on a Zoom call. And the most enticing thing in the American system was that if you classified someone as COVID in 2020, 21, maybe even into 2022, it'd be nice if somebody else was working on this besides Mark and I, but at some point in time, there was this blanket, if it's COVID, you don't have any, you try whatever you want, follow the protocol, but man, oh man, you have no liability at all as long as it's COVID. I mean, it's tough because it might be a bioweapon, right? That's the whispers in the background. So these doctors had financial incentives, legal incentives, authoritarian sort of hierarchical reasons to find everything COVID. And then if you just realize that in Scotland they did it, and in the Netherlands they did it because my father-in-law died of a urinary tract infection, as if we don't know how to fix that in 2020. As if it's by accident that people would starve or die of cold or thirst while they are sedated in Scotland or anywhere else. That's not by accident. That is sophisticated murder and lies, sculpting a very inconvenient population pyramid with all sorts of different incentives and forces. And I've said it a million times, but it's not about specific places and times and explanations. What you need to understand is that we are living in a world where all that needed to happen was a little more than was expected. Sweep it together just a little bit so you get these spikes here. That's not millions of people. It's hundreds of thousands, which actually means in America, the hundreds of thousands of people known to have died from opioids is enough to explain those spikes. Never mind the fact that we have numbers from the CDC that demonstrate that we lost control of pneumonia, something that we've had control of for decades. That's the problem here, ladies and gentlemen. And that's the reason why we can't stop focusing on this, because these are hundreds of thousands of Americans who have yet to have justice, hundreds of thousands of families that have yet to understand why they're missing their father. Because the same people that convinced us in chorus to believe that there might be a lab leak with a furin cleavage site having spike protein that can cause amyloidosis, those same people are now standing in front of us as part of a fake Trump administration to tell us that they've been fighting for us all along, and that, goodness sakes, it's the spike protein. We must wake up and realize we've been played, because America is going to be destroyed by this cognitive dissonance. And right now, unfortunately, the blue team feels very much like they are right. And it's by design. It's a military seesaw that we've been on. And we've got to get our country off of it. We've got to get our world off of it. We've got to get off of social media, because social media is what's sustaining this seesaw that Europe is on, that America is on, where there's a conservative side and a liberal or progressive side or something like that. This illusion is being cast over the entire English-speaking world. And it's being done using social media. And the primary objectives that they have achieved are, number one, a managing of the acute population pyramid problem, and that is a top-heavy population pyramid, a population pyramid with lots of old people that cost lots of money and don't pay taxes. That's an inconvenient thing in America, in Japan, even in China, everywhere in the progressed world. They have a top-heavy population pyramid where a bunch of people that were very wealthy and paying taxes stop paying taxes and start pulling money out in the form of Medicare and in the form of just living and not putting money in. And in America, given the fact that you understand that America's budget is not some kind of running a surplus Norway kind of situation, that change in financial dynamic is not small, because those old people of the boomer generation are not being replaced by a high-paid younger class. They're just not. And so this game is not something that no one's ever figured out. This game is not something that no one's ever seen coming. This change in fundamental dynamics of our socioeconomic system is not something that these people haven't anticipated. Instead, just like the actual fact of the population pyramid, the fact that there's an anticipated rise in all-cause mortality that was managed using manslaughter and lies, it is a simple fact that these people have known that this financial change was going to occur. It's a simple fact that these people have known that we were eventually going to have $37 trillion in national debt. And so now there is a narrative momentum in biology, public health, finance, and the governance of public opinion, because social media has become ever more relevant in everyone's mind as how information passes and is controlled. And so that's why the title of the show is Between Two Phases. We are between two phases right now, like it or not. I don't want to say that, but we are, because the dollar obviously is not going to be there when my son is 60 years old. I don't know how that math works, but I don't think that's really possible. I don't know why, but I just have the feeling that's not the case. And so we are between two phases. I don't think the European Union is a stable, multilateral organization that's going to be there in 100 years. I just don't see it. I don't think China is going to be who they are in 30 years either. I just don't see it. I don't know what it's going to be there. I don't claim to be that guy, but I know for sure that this was all part of a plan that's on a time scale that social media does not allow you to see. And so I got a lot of work to do. We've all got a lot of work to do. Thanks for being here. I will see you again in a minute.
So right, and when John Lewis said he was not a legitimate president,
Yes.
I assume you're on that page.
I am on that page because he's not a legitimate president.
I would agree with that, but he is the president. I mean, it's one of those you have to keep two thoughts in your head at the same time. We do have a president.
Yes.
We are still Americans. He is the American president. I agree. He didn't get there quite legitimately.
But here's the thing. I think we're underselling how the non-legitimately part of this works.
Oh, not me.
I
agree.
But I spoke to a group of Democrats and liberals last night in Florida, and half of them were, like this crowd, fired up and understanding. We were invaded, is what it boils down to, just because there was not blood on the streets.
Right.
If the Russians had come in with Cossacks and put him in, I think we would have had a different kind of reaction to it. That's the reaction we need now. What I saw last night was a lot of people hooting and hollering correctly and getting fired up and going, we're going to resist this in every way possible. And other people going, you really think it's that serious? Yes, I do think it's that serious.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. It's the point. Well, but it's the point of a war, other than to gain territory, is to put the guy you want in charge of somebody else's country.
Yeah.
And we're now only debating at this point, after the story in the New York Times yesterday, how much the Russians decided our election.
And let me cut to then mRNA.
Okay, sure.
Because, like, I was a guy who did not want the COVID vaccine, but I do want research on mRNA.
Sure.
I don't think that that's crazy stuff.
Right.
In fact, when the next one comes along, I may want to be first online for it.
Right.
So I'm not down with, I like Bobby too, but I'm not down with him cutting that shit.
Yeah, so mRNA is in every single one of our cells. DNA, RNA protein is kind of like the pathway. So mRNA itself is not bad. And the messaging around mRNA vaccines has led people to believe that anything that carries the letters mRNA is bad. We are all here, and we would not be here were it not for mRNA. mRNA vaccines are a relatively new technology, controversial because of their implementation during the COVID pandemic. And indeed, there are people out there who either insist on or have evidence that they have vaccine injuries of some sort. And that has been the rationale for removing this $500 million of support for mRNA research. I'm going to get some hate. I might get some love. Doesn't really matter to me. What is important for me to say is that there is incredible work on non-COVID related mRNA vaccines related to cancers and related to neurologic conditions and many genetic diseases and many, many things for which we would be absolutely foolish to ignore the technology.
Who's going to hate you for that?
Well,
Idiots.
many people, well.
But you can tell if someone's lying, you can sort of feel it in people. And I have lied. I'm sure I'll lie again. I don't want to lie, I don't think I'm a liar. I try not to be a liar. I don't want to be a liar. I think it's like really important not to be a liar.
for many of us, it's shocking. You cannot conceive of a world in which there are no ethical boundaries. You can't conceive of warfare in which there's no guardrails. There's no consensus about the rules of engagement, but that's what we're in right now. Okay? And you have to, for many of us, it's shocking. You cannot conceive of a world in which there are no ethical boundaries. You can't conceive of warfare in which there's no guardrails. There's no consensus about the rules of engagement, but that's what we're in right now. There are no ethics. There are no ethical boundaries to what they will do. It is all about the utilitarian. You have to completely park any idea of justice, right and wrong. All that is obsolete in this battlefield environment.
I think truth is good for kids. We're so busy lying, we don't even recognize the truth no more in society. We want everybody to feel good. That's not the way life is.
If it takes 2 less steps to get free fatty acids or ketones into the cell to the mitochondria, and it produces less byproduct, and you get more energy from it, doesn't that tell you that that's really the primary fuel, not the secondary fuel? It's not the alternate fuel. Sugar's the alternate fuel. So, you know, it's complex because when you think about, you know, ethnobotany and you think about, well, you know, the sun, the energy, it's photosynthesis and it makes glucose. But fats are also part of organic material, right? Carbon chain.
Right.
And plants, yes, they create glucose and they utilize glucose. But animals, you know, all use fats, and most are fat adapted all the time and should be. You know, most in the wild are fat adapted.
What time is it? Game time!
welcome to the show. There it is. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, you might not be a parent of teen kids if you don't know the cartoon characters you just saw there. But my kids are under attack just like yours. Those are Fortnite characters dancing there. I'm sorry about that. I won't use that often. Welcome to the show where intramuscular injection is dumb, RNA cannot pandemic, transfection is a crime, and autism is a myth used to confuse you about stuff. Welcome to the show, ladies and gentlemen. Biology's the way. Gigaohm Biological is part of a greater independent bright web that's just now forming. I'm getting really excited about it. You got to get yourself and your kids off of social media. Can you use it safely? I guess that's possible. But you're going to need to use it in a very different way with a very different conscious level of what's being done on it. So you're going to have to screen the people that you trust in a different way. And the best way to do it is to have a good understanding of why autism spectrum disorder is a myth. What would you use such a myth to do? Well, you would use it to make sure that intramuscular injection is never questioned as a methodology, that virology is never questioned as a science, that public health is never questioned as a reason. Those are pretty deep statements to make in 2025, and we're the only people on the internet making those statements. Also, pandemics and gain of function being mythologies. If anybody's saying that, they heard it from us first, because we were the first people on the internet to figure it out. My family is the one that figured it out at the dinner table, and it's my family that's putting it all on the line to try and get our kids to realize why the cheese is free on social media. And I think the way to do it is to teach them the biology that all these other people ignore. Show them the concerted effort to ignore this biology on the internet, and let them see that as a parallel to the way that discussions about Donald Trump are orchestrated on the internet, and how discussions about vitamins are orchestrated on the internet, so that your kids can see that the primary danger of social media and the internet is that people can gang up on you and lie to you. People on very complicated scripts. And who would have the most complicated script? Who would execute the most complicated script? Well, of course, the military would. If the military was going to run some kind of, pandemic exercise, and if they were going to try to make you believe that aliens were coming, and you go to the War of the Worlds analogy, the way that they would make you think that aliens were coming were put a bunch of people on social media with videos that seemed to indicate that aliens were coming. It would be almost too easy. And if you didn't stay focused on the biology of the absurdities of their claims about the aliens and what the aliens can do, or what the aliens have brought, or what the aliens they know about the aliens, if you didn't pay close attention to the biology, I mean staying razor focused on the biology, you might not realize that they were telling you a bunch of hocus pocus about the aliens, and all the biology of the aliens that they know for sure is the reason why you got to stay home. The reason why you got to take these tests, because the aliens are here, and if this test tests positive, your family might be in danger. You can see how this 5th generation warfare was used against us, and how just the collective agreement about the wrong questions is the way that they have bamboozled almost a planet of people. As crazy as it sounds, I think that's the reason why there's a health freedom movement, because this is about bamboozling a planet with social media. And so really almost a decade ago, they were already preparing for this global bamboozlement. Ladies and gentlemen, RNA cannot pandemic, intramuscular injection is dumb, and transfection is a crime. Population pyramids are real, that's why they don't show them to you. Population pyramids are real, that's why they don't show them to you. And instead, what they show you on social media is a glorified, it's a glorified Star Trek episode, where people like Robert Malone and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. pose as science officers on the bridge where Donald Trump poses as the captain of the Enterprise or the admiral or whatever, deciding what to do. And when Donald Trump comes in the room, everybody agrees that he's the captain. And so, you know, this is how the show works. And if you want to see how it works behind the scenes, if you want to go to the after show party, then you got to go along with the show. You just got to go along with the show. And the show includes a script. If you want to know how this cast of characters celebrates after the show, if you want to be on the show, you've got to audition. You've got to be selected. You got to be one of the lucky ones. And then when you sit in that chair, you are agreeing to recite the lines. Not only that, you're agreeing to memorize the lines and recite them in precise coordination with the other people on this set. And if you can do the thought exercise to realize how actually having a set with cameras and sounds and microphones and then post-editing and special effects is much more difficult to create an illusion than it is to have social media and a bunch of people with some really tiny, low-resolution videos to create an illusion. Especially if that illusion is about stuff that all the people in the audience already believe is real, because they've seen decades of movies that talk about contagions and worldwide spread and a pandemic that wipes out everybody and makes apes intelligent. So that's the urgency with which we need to get off of social media. Right now, most people that are engaged in social media think that they are able to change the script of the Star Trek episode that they are watching if they tweet or post the right thing on Facebook. And our kids are growing up to think that too. And that's the trap we need to end. Ladies and gentlemen, if you want to end it, one very rudimentary example of how we might end it is for our children to start their own peer tubes, their own upload sites where they can share videos with their friends and delete videos they want to delete and link to other kids' peer tubes or not, and just start a decentralized, federated version of the internet where people use open source platforms so that everybody is, you know, obviously not taking things from each other or profiting off of the interaction with one another, but freely sharing information with one another and promoting the people that they want to promote and building networks that really are true grassroots network on a virtual space. That's the kind of future that's possible with code that already exists. And so thanks to a supporter and friend, that's what we're doing here. And part of the financial burden of doing this, about a third of it is taken up by Mark Kulak right now, and he has got a channel there and he's uploading his stuff there. And that means that when you download the PeerTube app and you input this URL when prompted, you will be able to see him on your phone with very low to zero lag. You can watch my live streams, and soon we're going to be able to, well, we can probably right now already open up the possibility that he could also stream there live. It's just really a question of whether we're going to do that or whether we're going to just build another PeerTube instance for him. And the cool thing about PeerTube is that if his PeerTube, for example, was to mirror my live stream channel, then when you go to his PeerTube, one of the recommended channels that would be there would already be mine. And so even if somebody found his PeerTube and not mine, he could already choose to set it up that some of my videos get mirrored and even backed up on his servers, which is a pretty magnificent feature that's already built in. It's already there for you to try and build a network where if you want to give some resources to somebody else, you can. And this is really quite magnificent because, you know, this has been developed over many years. There's lots of people involved. The code is very open. And if we want to do the work necessary to do this on a bigger scale to support more people, maybe like Joe or Dan Cohen, or even just starting out with our friend Mark, this is what I want to do. One of the main things I want to do besides a high school curriculum is this: build this really independent bright web. And so that's one of the reasons why I think it's really important to support my work and Mark's work by sharing it, because I know that not everybody can support financially, and I know it's a big ask. But also think about the fact that with the app and having myself, all the work that I do available on your phone, that's as good as Netflix can do. That is as good. I don't even know. You might be able to put the PeerTube app on your smart TV. I should try that later because that's pretty badass. I bet you it will go on my Apple TV upstairs very easy because Apple TV is like the App Store, so that should work. And I suspect that a lot of these other devices are just the Google Play Store. So again, you can also download directly. I think somebody has said that before. It may be that Google Play and the App Store are adding code to it, and so you may somehow want to verify that or just try to download the app directly from their website or the GitHub and then upload it in the way that I'm not going to put out a way to do that, but I'm just saying somebody put that concern out there. So if you have that concern, there are steps that you could take that might make that better. So we have a fake anti-vax movement in America. That much is for certain. School shooting in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Wonderful. Great. Intramuscular injection is a dumb idea from the late 1800s. Transfection in healthy humans was always a crime. It's not some kind of, just barely tested technology. It is a technology we've been using on the academic bench for decades, at least a decade, if not 2 decades. RNA cannot pandemic because that's not how RNA works. And autism is a meaningless word by design because the more unrelated symptomologies they roll in under that umbrella, the more meaningless the term is. And if you're familiar with your biological history at all, you will be aware that the diagnosis of and classification of all the diseases associated with AIDS was an ever-expanding list. Essentially, any symptoms that were possessed by a group of people that was also testing positive for AIDS would essentially be added to the list, even if it was uterine cancer. And so these kinds of things are very, that's interesting. I have to set that to playback automatically loop. Why didn't that work? Maybe it's just because we're at the end of the rope there with the RAM. I test my RAM a lot with my PowerPoint presentations. I'm really happy that we have such a succinct message, a irreducibly complex background that was studied even rudimentarily between the year 2002 when the first SARS epidemic was declared, and 2020 would have given them about 18 years to study that background and to choose a few rather robust background signals on which to base this novel pandemic. This is just one scenario that wouldn't involve a lot of gain-of-function magic or a lot of, bioweapons or anything like that. And in fact, it would be foolproof. I think one of the things that a lot of these people that claim to be experts on how this is done and can describe kill boxes and this kind of thing, they omit one problem that I think all good long-term effective military plans have in them, inbuilt, is that they're almost foolproof. And if there is a plan that is close to foolproof, that's the plan they're going to take. And the close to foolproof plan is not to create a novel virus and let it go. A close to foolproof plan is not to make up a story about something that isn't there. A foolproof plan would involve a background signal that they misconstrued as spread. And the misconstruing of its spread should be as precise as possible, to have the illusion of specificity and high resolution measurements. And so that was also provided in spades by all of the diagnostic software and diagnostic tools and machines that got together, and all the new, grant money and funding of all these pop-up testing areas and all these kits that came in the mail that were produced with all kinds of really fancy, pictures and stuff on them, quick view at home COVID-19 tests and all this other crap. That stuff created an illusion that we could take a very high fidelity measurement with a swab that you mailed into the mail, and that high fidelity measurement would tell you something about the background, rather than something about the person that just put the swab in their nose. And that's the primary illusion, because that's still going on in every doctor's office. And more importantly, the doctors that are on Donald Trump and Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s side, they're all doing it. None of them, despite their amazing insight into the fraud of COVID, have not discovered or come to understand the PCR testing for viral markers as being fraudulent. Imagine that, because that's where we are. And it is this simple illusion of consensus on all sides that the PCR testing, the lateral flow testing, is not only not to be questioned, doesn't need to be regulated, but can be default accepted as a lucky happenstance that we now have a new gold standard for diagnosing the presence of and the symptomologies of viruses. And that is just absurd. We went in 2020 from not using it at all, giving it no credence, to now, for at least 2 years, basing all of our diagnosis on it. And if it failed, we would assume that it failed in a false negative way. Because if the symptoms are there, but the PCR test's positive, that just might mean because the RNA flew away too early. And so the really heartbreaking thing is that since I graduated from high school in 1990, it has been brutally obvious on the population pyramid that there is an expected rise in all-cause mortality. And if you watch it really carefully, it's just going to rise and make those bars at the top of the population pyramid grow in a way that will exceed the capacity of our old folks' homes and hospitals, will exceed the capacity of our socioeconomic system to absorb their unlimited care. And so with a carefully orchestrated global narrative, perpetuated by, announced by, and perpetuated by all the governments that had the problem or were under the finger economically or militarily of the governments that did have the problem, and they all went along with it. That's why this line is not level. That's why nobody in the dissident movement talks about this being upcoming 31st being Overdose Awareness Day, because those hundreds of thousands of Americans that are wrapped up in this graph cannot be acknowledged, or poof, there goes the novel virus. There goes the protocols even. Because the protocols don't even have to have killed hundreds of thousands of people if you acknowledge the opioid pandemic, the opioid crisis. Then you only needed to kill tens of thousands of people in America in total, which is peanuts, ladies and gentlemen, because 3 million people die every year here. And so you can very quickly see how those numbers are teeny tiny numbers. Once you subtract the malfeasance of removal of antibiotics and you subtract the opioids, there's almost nothing left. And so the illusion, the spell that people are under is magical, because very few people actually know anyone that they didn't expect to die but died of COVID, unless they went to the hospital and took oxygen. And those are enough. That's a small enough number of people that it's not catching fire, because this was almost a foolproof plan. The other convenient thing is that it seems like nobody in America cares that if you die of opioids, it might not be your fault. It's heartbreaking to see that people in neuroscience who have been studying addiction for 20 years understand that a one shot of cocaine can make a rat basically kill itself, because they just can't stop behaving in that detrimental way anymore. But we don't have any, there's no branch of neurobiology that's advocating for the addicts that are actually human, even though the neurobiology of addiction is well enough understood to know that anybody who's addicted to opioids is seriously, you're in big trouble. You almost, there's probably just a handful of people with the combination of, biology and mentality and spiritual awareness and whatever that can maybe pull themselves out of that on their own. But if one dose is a lethal dose, ladies and gentlemen, come on. If you know the history of the CDC and what they did in 2013, 14, 15 with regard to prescribed opiates, and you understand what started to happen, as I've highlighted above here, in 2019, it brings me almost to tears to think about what they've done to America and how they've ripped us apart in our minds by killing us and getting us to fight over why these people died. Because people go on the internet and are coordinatedly lying about why these people died. And they're making thousands of dollars a month on Substack, thousands of dollars a month on Locals. They have hundreds of thousands of subscribers on YouTube. They don't get censored for real. They get to go on Tucker Carlson. Their dads worked for the John F. Kennedy administration in the FDA when Estes Kefauver was killed. They are all intellectual property experts. Some of them worked for Goldman Sachs. You know, it's like a joke to me at this point. While we have Whitney Webb talking about Epstein. But Whitney Webb doesn't know anything about Goldman Sachs and Steve Bannon and Aaron Siri. Doesn't know anything about the intellectual property expert that Steve Bannon claims to be, that Kevin McKernan definitely is because of a Nature patent, Nature paper in 2013, that Robert Malone is. I mean, these people are not behind Robert F. Kennedy Jr. for nothing. And to my own defense, I did not fall for Robert F. Kennedy Jr. for nothing.
Right. And when John Lewis said he was not a legitimate president,
Yes.
I assume you're on that page.
I am on that page because he's not a legitimate president.
I would agree with that, but he is the president. I mean, it's one of those you have to keep two thoughts in your head at the same time.
Now, I think what really breaks this for me and what I'm really excited to share with you is this particular insight. If you really believed that Donald Trump was an illegitimate president, had stolen the presidency, then all bets are off. And all bets should have been off even after Biden got elected. And now you should be going batshit crazy because Donald Trump is now president again. And so it's kind of eerily parallel to the idea that some of these people have been writing books about all the kids that are being killed and all the kids that are being injured and all the eczema and all the allergies that all these kids are getting because of the vaccine schedule. But these people don't seem to make any real progress in understanding. And more importantly, it never becomes urgent enough to go all in. They still go on vacation. They still do like cannabis conferences. They're still selling, infrared saunas. Even though they know kids are being killed apparently every day by vaccines. I guess the only thing there is to do is sell stuff and, try to make ends meet. It's like you saw the aliens and they came to your house and they stole your kid and they brought him back a week later. But, whatever, I'm just going to go back working to the hardware store again. I'm going to tell people about it, but only in between my job and stuff. And I don't like that because I'm a person who had a long career in neuroscience. I had a lot to lose in the sense of going out and saying that this is a pandemic, this is a lab leak, this is crazy, we can't be putting on masks and putting kids on iPads at home, this is ridiculous. We've all forgotten that happened. We've all forgotten that for almost a year and a half, universities, hospitals, schools, businesses, everybody wore masks, everybody was nuts about it, and this was all part of them. These people, this guy too, and all the people that are now telling us kind of sort of skeptical of RNA, but now he says, what does he say? So listen to this carefully because this is what a national security governance by podcast looks like. They orchestrated in 2017 the Trump derangement syndrome by telling everybody that our our democracy had been hijacked. That's the absolute worst case scenario. No different than a lab leak. This guy was installed by Russian interference. Holy crap. And so half the country thinks they won. The other half of the country thinks that it was stolen. And this is the context in which we went into the pandemic. You cannot forget this. And this is the reason why people are now so destroyed, because it was a decades-long and certainly a decade-long theater. Because this is the same year that Brett Weinstein would have all of his problems and get to go in front of the Senate and get a $500,000 settlement. This is the same year that Vinay Prasad gets in the newspapers about being a, going against the grain kind of physician at Stanford. This is the year that a lot of the people started to do the things that they did going into the pandemic. This is the year when, all of the Joe Rogan stuff really took off. This is all of it. It's all right here. And you can see how absurd it is if you just listen to this actor. That's what he is, a scripted actor who's allowed to improvise within a script. That's the whole and only illusion here. And he could be an irate, unwitting participant, but it's not very likely. It's more likely that he is a limited, scripted actor, a need-to-know basis scripted actor, and he's staying on script because that's what you do when you have a chair on the USS Enterprise. You don't go off script because that's not what actors get paid to do. And they certainly don't question it.
Do have a president. Yes. We are still Americans. He is the American president. I agree. He didn't get there quite legitimately.
But here's the thing. I think we're underselling how the non-legitimately part of this works.
Oh, not me.
I
agree.
But I spoke to a group of Democrats and liberals last night in Florida, and half of them were, like this crowd, fired up and understanding. We were invaded, is what it boils down to, just because there was not blood on the streets.
Right.
So we were essentially invaded by Russia, and Donald Trump was elected president. Otherwise, we'd have Hillary right now. And people in that audience clapped reluctantly, even though the stage manager was probably going like this. And so this is 10 years ago, ladies and gentlemen. Essentially, it's 8 years ago. It's a long time ago, long enough for you to see how we have been played, how your family have been played, why you need to forgive anybody that voted for Biden, anybody that voted for Harris, anybody that voted for Trump. You have to forgive them. Because we were given two ridiculous choices several years in a row, and all of us have become numb to it because these people that we are watching are not numb to it. Because these people we are watching are very, very sure that our democracy has been destroyed. We've been invaded. And this guy is not arguing with him. I guess I have a slightly less worst case scenario take on that. You mean like a slightly less worst case scenario take on a lab leak being a engineered virus, or is it just a natural virus that they found and grew in the lab and then it got out because it was already, dangerous and already had its own potential? It's exactly the same kind of coin with two sides, and it's really just two sides of bullshit. And as long as these people are flipping it between each other and agreeing that those two sides we got to decide whether it's heads or tails. That's the whole thing. Because the coin will never land on its edge. And so, they agree that right now the coin to flip is it really that bad, or did we get invaded by Russia and now we have a puppet president? Is it really that bad, or do we have a puppet president? Is it a natural virus that they just grew in the laboratory because that's what they do in labs, or is it a lab leak? Are only a very few people hurt by vaccines, or do vaccines cause autism and stuff? It's a trap.
If the Russians had come in with Cossacks and put him in, I think we would have had a different kind of reaction to it. That's the reaction we need now. What I saw last night was a lot of people hooting and hollering correctly and getting fired up and going, we're going to resist this in every way possible. And other people going, you really think it's that serious? Yes, I do think it's that serious.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. It's the point, well, but it's the point of a war, other than to gain territory, is to put the guy you want in charge of somebody else's country.
Yeah.
And we're now only debating at this point, after the story in the New York Times yesterday, how much the Russians decided our election.
And now we fast forward to now.
mRNA.
Okay, sure.
Because, like, I was a guy who did not want the COVID vaccine, but I do want research on mRNA.
Sure.
I don't think that that's crazy stuff.
Right.
In fact, when the next one comes along, I may want to be first online for it.
Now, you can't possibly see this as anything other than an actor. And once you see this guy as an actor and realize that this is the guy that fooled our family into thinking Donald Trump was okay or better than Harris, he's part of the same show that Steve Bannon is, that Joy Behar is, that all of these people are. They're all one little tiny cadre of fake conservatives that have come from the Democratic Party because the Democratic Party went too far. I think my friend Mark Kulak explained it very well, and it's probably still not exactly how it's best said, but I think it's close. There are only really two kinds of people right now that you need to concern yourself with. People that want to be in power and people that mind their own business. That just, try to set an example, try to do their best, take care of their garden, whatever that is. Try to help those people around them, try to lift those people up around them. And then you have people who want to be in power. And once you understand that the hierarchy of power, the lower hierarchy is the public part. If you are higher in the hierarchy, you might not be so public. And of course, the highest people in the hierarchy, nobody ever talks about. And that, I think we all can accept on a sort of imaginary level or a thought experiment level. But what you need to accept it is on a governance level. That we are in a phase transition between the governance by newspaper and TV show and radio program and magazine to governance by cable TV and the overwhelming amount of BS on cable TV, the overwhelming amount of time-wasting content on cable TV, to social media, where people can be actively manipulated based on their choices, based on their preferences, and then based on, again, coordinated acting to create the stories that people are engaged in, to create the Star Trek episodes and the Expanse and the intrigue of the White House, all of which will be amplified by the media, all of which has to be amplified by the media because social media makes it that people are talking about it. Social media creates the trends that mainstream media is kind of forced to report on. And so the power has been inverted over the course of this transition through the pandemic because people were forced to go on social media, and people, and I mean people like this, were actively telling you that the truth was available on Twitter. That this person has a particularly good Twitter feed, or I find all of this information on Twitter, or I have a Substack. That's all not by accident. That is by design. And if there is any wrestling for power that's happening, it is a wrestling for power between the people who are now kind of in control of social media and the people that were in control of what we would call legacy media, and how well they were able to transition to having a presence on the internet. How well did the New York Times transition? How well is the New York Times transitioning to pushing their content in a podcast sort of way? I showed you yesterday. The New York Times has already transitioned to podcasting. And that transition is by design. That is the phase that we are in right now. That transition is happening, and people have, for a large extent, accepted it. What's terrible is that if we don't pull our heads out, our children will never see it. and governance by actors like Bill Maher can continue into the endless future. All we need are a group of elite people to agree that it's not happening. All we have to do is have an elite group of people that understands that governance is occurring via theater, that none of the things that the populace is arguing about are actually relevant to reality or to where the cruise ship is headed, which is inverting the sovereignty of our grandchildren to experimental animal status.
Right. So I'm not down with, I like Bobby too, but I'm not down with him cutting that shit.
Yeah, so mRNA is in every single one of our cells. DNA, RNA protein is kind of like the pathway. So mRNA itself is not bad. And the messaging around mRNA vaccines has led people to believe that anything that carries the letters mRNA is bad. We are all here, and we would not be here were it not for mRNA.
Okay, so that's a terribly, terribly stupid, simple, dumb, simple, I guess I say, dumb, simple explanation, and I want to give you a good analogy why. No automobile that has a 4-stroke engine will run without oil in it, and if you run without sufficient oil, that engine will necessarily seize up, and I think that's pretty much a catastrophic condition for your car. So you could say that, you know, none of the cars on the road would be running quietly as they are, smoke-free as they are, or reliably as they are without regular maintenance that includes oil. In no way, shape, or form does that mean that crude oil could be used there. It doesn't mean that you can put other things in that hole. It means that oil should go in that hole, not anywhere, but in that hole, and only at the prescribed amount. And so there's quite a bit of specificity to what oil does in a car and how you can safely maintain oil levels in a car and apply oil to a car. And as I said yesterday or the day before, it would be probably mechanically unsound to take a quart of oil and just kind of pour it over the top of the engine and hope that it got where it needed to be. And so for him to say that RNA, we wouldn't be here without RNA, is so dumb. And for him to say that DNA to RNA to protein is so incredibly dumb, because in between RNA and protein is the most magical molecular machinery that we know of to date, the ribosome. We know that ribosomes are tissue specific. We know that ribosomes can even be subtissue specific. We know that mitochondria have their own ribosomes. And so the idea that we can just put oil anywhere in the car, that we can just put mRNA anywhere in our bodies, and it doesn't matter which ribosome it goes through or where that protein ends up or what other protein fragments are produced or what other mRNA processes are interfered with, mRNA is, we wouldn't be here without it. And this is the depth of the biological explanation that Stanford University and this fraud is offering America, albeit on a very, you know, like, who watches Bill Maher anymore? The point being, though, ladies and gentlemen, is that all the people that do, all the people that potentially could see this and be like, huh? That's where America is. We weren't ready for this. This is just the beginning of the faceplant that they have ready for everybody that followed Donald Trump and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Marty McCary and Jayanta Bhattacharya into this White House. These people, you have been fooled by them. And that's why Bill Maher has been scripted to say, I'm not down with him ending that shit. And that's why this Stanford professor is scripted to tell you in a very dumb, simple sort of way why RNA is great and why you should look forward to more RNA, because for decades they've known that this is where they're going to go. But how in the world could they do it before they had the ability to sequence and produce RNA in quantity without very much cost? They couldn't do that in 2000. They couldn't do that in 2005. And so even if they wanted to inject an RNA in everybody in 2005, they wouldn't have been able to do it. And there wouldn't have been a population pyramid signal behind which to hide it.
mRNA vaccines are a relatively new technology. controversial because of their implementation during the COVID pandemic. And indeed, there are people out there who either insist on or have evidence that they have vaccine injuries of some sort. And that has been the rationale for removing this $500 million of support for mRNA research. I'm going to get some hate. I might get some love. Doesn't really matter to me. What is important for me to say is that there is incredible work on non-COVID related mRNA vaccines related to cancers and related to neurologic conditions and many genetic diseases and many, many things for which we would be absolutely foolish to ignore the technology.
Now, the reason why it's so creepy that he says that, for anybody that's still not tuned in to the real national security theater that's going on here, behind Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and his fraudulent script is a man by the name of Robert Malone, who has more than 2 decades of connections to all of this public health infrastructure, going back to having the head of DITRA, David Hone, sleeping on his couch during grad school, going back to Zika and Ebola and the anthrax vaccine and the WHO and Rick Bright and Inovio and Solvay and Gavi. So this guy, Robert Malone, behind Robert F. Kennedy Jr., is the dude that convinced everybody, or was convinced by social media, to be a whistleblower about the mRNA vaccine. And your family and friends may have been fooled by Robert Malone or any of his compadres like Pierre Corey or Merrill Nass or Ryan Cole or Peter McCullough. And all of those people have been herding cats and got them to vote for Donald Trump and the promise of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. All the while, the plan was to make and humiliate all of those people. And they're going to humiliate you by what you hear here. That the next generation of mRNA is going, the next generation of RNA injections is going to go forward. And it is going to be given to your children if you don't do something about it now. And they are going to do it by admitting that there is a very rare vaccine injury signal. And that vaccine injury signal was actually higher for the rollout of the COVID vaccines. And some of these people were right. But vaccines work. Vaccines don't cause autism. And these people are all frauds. The measles vaccine actually works. They might even be able to prove it to you. Imagine that. Now, I'm not telling you that the measles vaccine works, but I'm telling you that the best way to object to vaccines is to not talk about them, to not use that incredibly ridiculously aspecific term. Instead, and just say that you think that intramuscular injection has been a dumb idea since the late 1800s, when people were injecting themselves with all kinds of stuff, but mostly morphine. And the only vaccines that existed at the time were subcutaneous or cutaneous vaccines that involved pain and scarring. And so we misconstrued the ability, the gift of being able to inject morphine intramuscularly as evidence that we could inject whatever we wanted to intramuscularly, and it might actually be better than scratching it into our skin. And the people who thought that were biologists and doctors in the late 1800s. And because that idea was handed down, because that idea produced textbooks in English, like this textbook right here that is titled Hypodermic Injections in the Treatment of Neuralgia, Rheumatism, Gout, and Other Diseases, written in 1865. It even resulted in textbooks in German, okay? In German. And this textbook is called Die Hypodermatische Injection der Arzneimittel, and it is written in 1867. So don't you think for one second that I'm joking when I say that intramuscular injection is a dumb idea from the 1800s. It actually is. And so a couple generations with this bad assumption, and here we are. Now, how many people know it's a bad assumption? I don't know. But if you think of this as lemmings, if you see how people behave in groups, then it's very easy to understand how we got here. Wouldn't take very many people to understand. One more example of how we're being played by the falseness of the Trump administration and all these fake health freedom people that can't figure it out. So right now we're talking about giving money to rural hospitals, but we're not addressing the opioid epidemic. We're not talking about what's happening, what happened with them. In fact, it's strange, but the deaths are going down. You know, kind of like how the deaths due to untreated pneumonia just kind of disappeared. It would be pretty tragic, wouldn't it, if 5 years of record opioid deaths started to go down, maybe even went back to a baseline that people accepted, but it was still much higher than it ever should be. How many people in America should die of synthetically manufactured opioids on the street? How many is acceptable? Because quite frankly, for me, it's zero. I don't think anybody in our country should be dying of something that is essentially poisonous on contact. That just seems insane. Never mind 20,000. Never mind 50,000. Never mind 110,000. I think we're really in big trouble, ladies and gentlemen, because we have people telling us that America is under attack or something like that, but we're under attack by the Kazakhs of Russia. We're under attack because they're inverting our elections. We're under attack because the administration isn't funding mRNA technology. We're under attack because we are being governed by podcasts. And nothing that anyone that's skillfully using social media, nothing that they are thinking about is relevant to their well-being or their kids' future.
I'm going to hate you for that.
Well,
idiots.
many people, well,
yes, there is good evidence of it hurting animals as well. Yes, there is. I'm not sure if it's higher or lower evidence. Again, it's one of those things where we would need to investigate it more. But I do know for sure in my all of my study, I know for sure we're right about this. That just the fact of the matter is the immune system, as we best understand it, with the most open-mindedness, you still must acknowledge that the immune system is organized around a barrier and has a directionality to it. An intramuscular injection ignores that barrier and the directionality of it, and attempts to augment it by bypassing it. And that's what makes it a dumb methodology. The other evidence that it's a dumb methodology is that they were lauding it as could be used for anything in 1860. These are real books. They're freaking cool. And they're less than like $40 on eBay if you don't get there before me. But you didn't. I did. Virology is also never questioned as a science effectively. They put people in place in 2020 to question virology and PCR ineffectively. The most egregious examples of these people are like Alex Zeck and Andrew Kaufman and Tom Cowan, who actually had a book before the pandemic. Andrew Kaufman, who had a grant for biometric prison monitoring technology. These people were all scripted, and the most malevolent of that script was the one that didn't question virology in a useful way, and therefore anybody that fell into that trap was never going to get out. Just like if you fell into Robert Malone or Peter McCullough, you were never really going to get out, because none of them are really questioning this usefully anymore. And pandemics and gain of function are also a myth. You can just get that out of your head right now. You don't have to worry about it. And these people are fighting very, very hard to make sure that you always worry about it. And this guy was weaponized against us. I think he's pretty innocent, you know, like a guy who's the victim of a Truman Show. Every person that has regular access to this guy is essentially probably playing him at this point. It's unfortunate, but true. or they're duped as he is. But there's no way for me to see it any other way. This is the interpretation of reality that I'm passing on to as many people as possible. That America has been run by this two-party national security state theater for a couple decades now. And it's not a all-powerful thing, but from the perspective of how America works, it kind of is, because America's fiat currency has enabled a sort of low-level financial control of things. That there may be a lot of uncertainties at a higher level. There may be vying for control of different parts of the machinery at a higher level, but at the lowest level, where we find ourselves trying to buy a house, we have nothing, and we have no chance of entering that ruling class where you can have multiple homes that are all your private residence or your primary residence and all that shit. And so the people that rise into clear view are rising into clear view as part of the national security theater, the Star Trek set that we've been tricked into watching as real on social media. For goodness sakes, during the Biden administration, they just told you that they were using a set and not actually in the White House. They made a fake set. And everybody accepted it because, well, it's COVID. I mean, that's what we got to do. And so each side of this national security theater has gone along with an absurdity for a long time. And each side thinks the other side has done the same thing. And so it's more than dangerous where we are now, because the coordinated script that we've all participated in on social media has convinced us incorrectly that we are right. And when I say that, I could be talking about the blue team or the red team, and that's the trap you have to see. Even if you think your family and friends are lost on the blue team, or you think your family and friends are lost on the red team, you're wrong. You're all lost. We are all lost until we take those hats off and start to realize that up until now, I guess I should just say it that way. Up until now, we have not been in control. Up until now, we have not been fighting for the right things. We have been fantasizing about a president that doesn't exist, a dichotomy between Trump is real and Trump isn't. Trump is a genius or Trump isn't. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is a genius or he's not. Those dichotomies are all wrong. They're all nonsense. It's just like arguing about whether Captain Kirk or Lieutenant Spock is correct. Never mind thinking that you might never talk to your parents again because you're sure Spock is right. That's where this national security theater got us. That's how dangerous of a situation we are in.
Despite COVID, which was a very unfortunate situation for the whole world, we did a great job with it. Never got the credit for the job we did. Operation Warp Speed, people say, is one of the greatest achievements ever in politics or in the military, because it was almost a military procedure. But everybody, including Putin, said that Operation Warp Speed, what you did with that, nobody can believe it. And we did a great job. But it was a horrible pall over our country. We had a very dark cloud over the world. That was a very, very bad thing that came out of Wuhan, which I said it came out of Wuhan. That's where it came from. And China suffered greatly, but everybody did. But we, because it was almost a military procedure. But
Can you see it's scripted? That's a scripted actor reading a script. It was almost a military procedure. The right, conservative right populist movement assembled on social media by Steve Bannon and Steve Hatfill and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and the fake anti-vax movement of CHD and ICANN and the Brownstone Institute and all these nonsense organizations, they are all on the same script. They are behind the Donald Trump script as well. It's all coordinated script. That's why he said that. because there are people on our side that are trying to convince us it was the DOD, remember? But remember, what actually is happening is that something else has been militarized, and that is the control of thought on social media, the scripting of narratives on social media. And that has been magnificently controlled by at least two people who used to work for Goldman Sachs, Aaron Seary and Steve Bannon.
Everybody, including Putin, said that Operation Warp Speed, what you did with that, nobody can believe it. And we did a great job, but it was a horrible, horrible pall over our country. We had a very dark cloud over the world. That was a very, very bad thing that came out of Wuhan, which I said it came out of Wuhan. That's where it came from. And China suffered greatly, but everybody did. But we did a good job with that, as good as you can possibly do, and we came back, and now we're stronger than ever before.
That was a meeting like yesterday. And now we're supposed to also believe that we have a director of national intelligence that is saving our democracy by producing social media videos in a seatbelt.
Dr. Fauci demanded that we place blind faith in him and the government. It was about control. It was about more money, huge amounts of money, our taxpayer dollars being put directly into the pockets of big pharma.
You must see this woman as a fraud. You must see that you are being set up. The other side sees this as a really bad joke. The rest of America can see that this is absurd, just like you could see that masking up children was absurd, that forcing masks on people in airplanes was absurd. They can see that this is absurd. They can see that Donald Trump is absurd. They can see that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. swinging from chains with his shirt off is absurd. They can see that a 70-year-old man who can do pull-ups and push-ups like he does is absurd. They can see it. Just like you can see that the gender spectrum is absurd. Just like you can see that transitioning kids at age 14 is absurd. They can see that this is absurd. And unless we snap out of it and come together as a country and realize how we've been fragmented, how magnificently visible it is right now, how we've been fragmented, and go to the local pub and have a beer together really quick, get to the bar, take the no smoking sign down, get the cigarettes out again and hang out. I don't know, that's probably the worst recommendation I've ever given on my show, but you know what I'm trying to say? There's a Dutch word, gezelligheid. And it is the conviviality that gets created when two people that know each other really well can spend time together. And actually, the best example of what I think in my mind, in my imagination, what gezelligheid is when you can sit together with somebody for a long time and not say anything, watching people walk by on the street and then come to the same conclusion of what you're watching. Hey, did you see that lady? Oh yeah, I was watching her too. And know that that person is watching with similar eyes as you, or even better, maybe just know the perspective that that person has because of the history with their mom or the way that they broke up with their last boyfriend. And with very few words, you can impart volumes of information over a quiet tea on a street side. And that kind of conviviality, that energy that gets created by people that are spending time together, that love one another unconditionally, that kind of energy is almost absent from our lives on social media as they stand right now. And it is because of our belief in people like Tulsi Gabbard that got us here. I'm not yelling at anybody but myself because I bought into this too. I thought something else was happening. I thought it had to be one or the other, right? It's all of it. It's not the Klingons. It's not the Federation. It's not the Romulans. It's not Q, and it's not the Borg. It's one show. It's all one show. It doesn't matter what hat you buy or who you cheer for. And it certainly doesn't matter what you tweet.
Now we know Fauci has lied to Congress numerous times, including the lie that the National Institute of Health did not and does not perform or fund gain-of-function research. This is a serious one, and it's a crime that Democrats have imprisoned Republicans for, lying under oath before Congress. We
are not being saved by a Hawaiian surfer lady who's now our director of national intelligence and saving us by making videos that are subtitled with a seatbelt on. There's no way. There's no way. It's not possible. There's no way this is real. You've got to come to that conclusion right now. This woman with that hairdo on Fox News is not real. And you've got to pull yourself out of this illusion right now. Alex Jones has never been real. Laura Loomer's not real. Just like Sasha Latipova's daughter, Soph, is not real. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is a victim of all the people that have surrounded him for the last 10 years and you can't even really call him a victim because he is an active national security scripted actor. There's no other way to explain it. He can't be that dumb. He knows what he's doing. The people around him know what they're doing. And that's why they all came around me and all tried to get me to get under that big top tent of health freedom with $105,000 a year and some, passwords and stuff. That's why they put my name in that book, because they just hoped. Goodness sakes, you know how much money I could be making probably if I would have just said it's a lab leak and this is the best book ever. It's a lab leak, lab leak, lab leak. I wouldn't have made any money. They would have just gone with the narrative, right? That Charles Rixey was the hero. That Alex Washburn figured it out, or Robert F. Kennedy Jr. knew it all along, and then they would be still right here where they're going to drop us on our head and tell you, oh, whoops, sorry. Vaccine injury turns out to be really, really rare. It's awful, ladies and gentlemen, where they brought us, but we can get out. I know we can get out. I know we can. I know we can get out if we just start to see that the American public is governed by national security actors. If we can just see that the citizens are being actively divided on false pretenses that don't mesh together. That the pandemic was the culmination of a long con that at least can be seen to have started around 2015 when Brandy Vaughan and Tony Bark were starting to rise, when ICANN was being formed on paper, when Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was being actively recruited to convert from an environmentalist to an anti-vaxxer, when Brian Hooker was recruited in 2013 or 14 to stop saying, that autism is a bullshit word and start saying it, that autism is what my son has and it's caused by vaccines. And here we are a decade later with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and his handler, Brian Hooker, telling all the world that vaccines cause autism without ever trying to be very specific, except for like about a month in 2025 when he said something about, we're talking about profound autism, and then tried to describe profound autism as kids that bang their head against the wall and have projectile diarrhea. But suddenly that term disappeared again. I think you can see that might be evidence of him being an improvising scripted actor, and that's why they corrected that. That went away very fast. And now we are less than 2 weeks from the proposed announcement of what causes autism, and they just said it in a staff meeting on camera that I'm going to tell you in a couple weeks. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. said they're going to tell you in a couple weeks. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a long con. The Human Genome Project was never completed. The Human Genome Project will not be completed until as many full genomes of human beings are collected, along with their entire detailed medical history as possible. Otherwise, they have no hope of feeding any useful data into a machine learning algorithm that can give them any useful information out. And they have known that since Joshua Lederberg first kind of predicted that this is how we would crack this code. We wouldn't just do it, with compasses and rulers and calculators. The Human Genome Project hasn't even really started yet. They're still doing startup projects and test runs on limited data sets to see if they can, for example, take all the genetic data that they collected from college kids and use a machine learning algorithm to interface that back with the college kids' health records and see if there's some kind of pattern that shows up that allows them to get accurate with that. Do they have that database yet? Yes, they do. Do they have that data set yet? Yes, they do. Are they running that experiment yet? I bet they are. And I bet you there were some companies that paid top dollar for those remnants that were produced at all those universities in 2020, 21, 22, and as facilitated by both sides of this ridiculous narrative. Kevin McKernan, Robert Malone, Peter McCullough on one side, and Vincent Racaniello and Griffin and Liana Wen on this side.
Believed in Donald Trump, had hope. I had hope. I had hoped that Donald Trump was going to be different. In fact, you know, when he came in and he got rid of all the kind of the censorship of the left, but he replaced it with censorship of the right. And now he invented a new protected class. And they're Zionists. He says they're Jews, but they're really just Zionists, that he's the protected class. And, you know, he's convicting people for thought crimes over here. You know, it's like, hey, can you release the Epstein files? Like you said you were going to? No, but I can kick a college student out of the country for criticizing Israel in an op-ed. How about that? Does that work for you? So that's where we're at. So it's a big disappointment. I had told Chris Hedges that I had hoped that Donald Trump would be better and different and less of a warmonger, but I didn't have faith. I had hope, right? Because I got to have hope. And but
can you feel the once was liberal, now I guess is a conservative, starting to turn on Donald Trump and Robert F. Kennedy Jr.? Can you feel it? Now what I want you to do is imagine if they reveal that the Donald Trump shooting in Butler, Pennsylvania, an hour north of my house, supposedly done by a kid that goes to the same high school as my kid. Stop lying! That was faked. What would, just hypothetically, do that thought experiment? What would happen?
That those hopes are all dashed, and it's no matter who you vote for, you get John McCain.
What do you think happened that day in Butler, Pennsylvania? What do you think? You know, there's we've been told this, you know, this completely unsatisfactory, incomplete version of events that this skinny kid in a t-shirt, you know, just managed to get into a vantage point from which he could take a couple of shots. I mean, a man died, but you know, obviously that man was not Donald Trump. What do you think? Donald Trump with his bloodied hand and his bloodied ear. What do you think happened?
I don't know, but I'll tell you what, I wouldn't dismiss anybody's theory about it. Anybody's theory, you know, even to the point of Donald Trump being in on it. I wouldn't dismiss it. It's because Donald Trump closing down that investigation is the most suspicious thing in the world. That is a tip-off. It's like, it's the equivalent.
So can you imagine it or not? I can imagine it. And it would absolutely ruin the American populace. It would ruin us unless we get ahead of it. Unless we get ahead of it. And the only way to get ahead of it, number one, is to get off of social media. And if you're on social media, you need to call out this theater for what it is. And you need to call out the Trump administration for what they are. And they are not bad guys that are destroying the democracy. They are part of a contiguous show. Obama, Trump, Biden, Obama. Or sorry, Biden, Trump is all one contiguous national security theater. Goes back to around 2015. And it extends all the way to right now. And that's why the Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump debates now look so ridiculous. That's why the Bill Maher show from 2017 now sounds so ridiculous. Because it was an orchestrated, scripted theater, and they are still on that script now. And this guy is just reading the script. He doesn't know where the cruise ship is going. He's just agreed to sit in the chair on the USS Enterprise and say the lines in coordination with the other people. It's a little bit of improv. That's what comedians do.
equivalent of you can't ask questions about COVID. It's like, what? We don't get to know and so there's something going on there. And
so now what I want you to think about with this next video is that we're going to roll back time and we're going to go back to 2020 in September, when a whole 9 months of the pandemic has already transpired, where we're already pretty sure that this is a lab leak, where we're already sure that there's a spike protein, and we're about to roll out the vaccine, especially the AstraZeneca and the Johnson & Johnson vaccines, which were orchestrated, scripted to come out first, so that they, as old, obviously doesn't going to work because Jesse Gelsinger showed us it wouldn't work. They were going to be discarded, but they needed to be rolled out. And then, the flag raised about, oh, there seems to be some adverse events in the Johnson & Johnson or in the AstraZeneca, and so we better pull that adenovirus vaccine. Whew, everybody felt so safe. At least they're honest. And that was actually scripted. They already knew that technology was inappropriate and old because Robert Malone was already a whistleblower about that with regard to Jesse Gelsinger a decade earlier. So that was obviously orchestrated. And so what would happen if in September of 2020, Brett Weinstein, the son of Les Weinstein, the first intellectual property lawyer ever to serve in the Department of Justice, who just happened to serve in the Department of Justice of John F. Kennedy and Robert F. Kennedy, whose son, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., is now head of HHS. What would happen if that guy in September of 2020, after already having a member of Drastic on his podcast and claiming that this was a lab leaked virus, was also trying to orchestrate a election movement in 2020 in September? And what if he was promoting somebody like, I don't know, a Hawaiian surfer who would become director of national intelligence for the Trump administration and try to save us by podcasting about Tony Fauci from a seatbelt? What if he was doing that with Matt Taibbi and Melissa Chen, the lady who works for The Spectator, who also, this Andrew No, NGO, also works for The Spectator. You know, the guy who became famous because of Floyd 19. What if that was the people that he was podcasting with? Because that would be kind of weird, right?
Yeah.
And it turns out that's who he was actually podcasting with. And so he was running this unity movement, the campfire movement, Campfire Wiki from Matt Crawford. It's all the same. It's all the same stupid show. And it's all the same stupid network of actors who was assembled in 2020, added to through 2020, and then is stuck together, stuck to the script that was supposed to get Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Robert Malone and Jay Bhattacharya and all these people as close to they could to the chairs that they're in right now. And Melissa Chen is related to Piper Stover because they're both in some kind of organization together. Piper Stover claimed to have just sent a $25 suggestion tip to Brett Weinstein, and that's what led to Brett Weinstein calling me, and yet they are already associated. Piper Stover is probably one of the people running Melissa Chen, not Melissa Chen being Piper Stover's boss. There's just no way. That doesn't make any sense at all. But that's what I was told. And so that's a pretty extraordinary thing to be told, especially if you're told that by somebody who says they have your best interest in mind, and then that same person never got here. Never got to the point where Mark Kulak did, where he can show that this woman's father-in-law is like the equivalent of some kind of really big conservative leader in the UK. That she has been interacting with the Weinstein brothers for years, interacting with Peterson, interacting with Lindsay and the other guy that elevated Brett Weinstein in 2017. This is all one assembly of podcast control grid actors establishing themselves on the internet so that they could be used for this military operation. And I don't care how read in they are. It could be, for example, that Matt Taibbi is a victim of these two guys' coordinated script. That would make a lot of sense here.
Campfire. I am very pleased to be joined by Melissa Chen, who is the New York editor for The Spectator USA, and Matt Taibbi, who is a reporter at Rolling Stone and can also be found on Substack. Melissa and I are big fans of your Substack, Matt. And
so here we are plugging X or Twitter and Substack already at the and that is scripted. That is scripted.
I hope people will join it and read and be as delighted as we are with it.
Thank you.
Welcome to both of you.
Thank you for having us on.
So, there's a lot going on in the land of unity at the moment. Not all of it good. Some of it, however, is excellent. This week, we held a ranked choice vote.
And so notice, they're starting a podcast here, not acknowledging the pandemic in any way, right before the largest wave of murder in America will occur. And that's why I have it blocked here so that you can't really see it, because that's what this podcast doesn't even, it's right there. It looks like the pandemic has, I don't even talk about it. It's not like it's there yet. Now, thousands of Americans are about to be killed in the next 6 months by protocols and lack of antibiotics and opioids.
And we determined which ticket it is that we intend to draft. The ticket we settled on is Tulsi Gabbard and Dan Crenshaw. And
Tulsi Gabbard and Ben Crenshaw? Is that the guy with the eye patch? Because he's also a WEF young leader. That's really remarkable. Really remarkable. And we're supposed to believe that he presided over a completely honest and totally fair and objective ranked choice voting that brought those two to the top in September of 2020. What is he doing here other than splintering the vote of Donald Trump? What is he doing here other than splintering off any independent thinking centrist type people that might watch any of those people? You see what's happening here? So in 2020, the same people who would say that it was a lab leak, the same people that would tell us that the DNA contamination in the shot is causing cancer, those same people were splitting the vote of Donald Trump in 2020 to try and elect Tulsi Gabbard. Now, you can say that this guy didn't have an audience, he wasn't watching, blah, 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 blah. But remember how the election went in 2020. Remember how little would need to happen in order for any of those results to occur. It's just a matter of confusion. It's just a matter of setting certain knobs at certain places and realizing that those knobs were all set at the opposite setting a year ago, where all of these people went behind Donald Trump, advocated for Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to be the vice president, said that it was imperative that these people that all came together as a dissident movement voted for Donald Trump and accepted that he's playing 5D chess. These are the same people. It can't be by accident. I'm sorry, my fellow Americans, it cannot be by accident. Our country has been under attack on social media for some time, and the main reasons why we hate our neighbors or discount our neighbors' opinions is because we have been too skillfully using social media for too long, and we believe things that these actors have led us to believe. Like, sooner or later, the Borg are going to come and assimilate all of us. You can't watch Star Trek with that much commitment, but we watch the social media with that much commitment, and that's why our society is fractured right now.
So that's a big accomplishment. First of all, ranked choice voting. I don't know if you guys have engaged in any ranked.
Not going to do that anymore, of course.
And so I got involved.
We got to
in
do
the COVID
work.
sort of dissonance side of things, because when I saw how they were using PCR in COVID, I realized it was a fraud. Like we run PCR on cannabis plants all day long. This is our bread and butter. We make tests that look for pathogens on cannabis, like that
PCR is essentially like the nose swab test that people are doing.
Yeah, and PCR is actually a really good test. They destroyed the reputation of PCR in COVID. You know, it can
This
be.
was invented by Kerry Mullis.
Yes, yeah, great book. You should read his book.
I've been wanting to. I've watched some interviews with him. He seems like a really cool dude. He was a surfer.
He was a surfer. Sadly, died right before the pandemic. But
and he hated Fauci.
Yes, I think anyone who gets their nose into the space will come to the same conclusion as him.
Okay, so we stop here for a second. I think the first thing to hear there is that he says PCR for COVID is a fraud, but it destroyed the reputation of PCR in COVID. But that would be a lie. Just very simple fact, that's a lie, because every hospital in America is using a bank test for up to 18 different viral signals at once. Illumina sells one. There's a bunch of companies that sell these tests. They're all run on site now. It's a multi-million-dollar industry that has produced a new level of DNA remnants that can be collected by whoever needs them. And they're going on ad infinitum, and everybody believes that they work. So there is actually no destroyed reputation of PCR in COVID at all. And a lot of that is thanks to him, because since the beginning in 2020, he's been writing papers about how PCR can be used to test for COVID. So you can just hear it in the first sentences. He's just talking out of both sides of his head. You want me to replay it again? I can play it again now that you know the first objection, but I can do it sentence by sentence.
It's unfortunately, if you're in the public, he's elevated as some we make tests that look for pathogens on cannabis, like that
PCR is essentially like the nose swab test that people are doing.
Yeah, and PCR is actually a really good test. They destroyed the reputation of PCR in COVID. You know, it can
This
be.
was invented by Kerry Mullis.
Yes, yeah, great book. You should read his book.
If they destroyed the reputation of PCR, then we wouldn't be using it anymore. But we are using it. That's a nonsense statement, and he didn't explain anything about what's missing from it. So, for example, he didn't tell you that if you have a transcript like this, that you could make the choice of putting your primers here and there, or you could put your primers here and there, or you could use all four of these primers and test for both of these amplicons and only call that a positive and call that a better test. Or you could take that same transcript and you could put 2 layers of primers inside of that with nested reactions, and that could be nested primers, which would make this even more specific. Or you could take that test and you could just take whatever's amplified and you could sequence it and make sure that the sequence that shows up is the sequence that the test is testing for, and that the fluorescence wasn't generated by a false positive. And even this rudimentary list of only 3 ways to make PCR better was not expounded upon or included in any interview this guy has ever done. And so he can say all he wants about what he does and how we make tests for cannabis and stuff like that, but he's not explaining to you what they did during the pandemic and how those 2 statements can be true, that PCR is really great, but its reputation got ruined. Well, how would you do that? You would use it incorrectly. And you don't use it incorrectly by overcycling it, because overcycling will not make primers that aren't specific work. If these primers are designed well, overcycling is not going to get you a positive. That is the reality that everyone in academia in America and around the Western world knew from the very beginning. So if they accepted the TV story, which is that the PCR worked, then their assumption was that there were positive and negative controls, just like I use in my lab. And people like Robert Malone and Meryl Nass, Jessica Rose, Tony Fauci and Peter Daszak, and Richard E. Bright, and Rick Bright, and Peter Navarro, all these people were scripted to be sure that they would never explain this to you. How it could be a magnificent tool for making lots of DNA. It could be a magnificent tool for discovering what's in a place that we can't see, but it's a terribly inaccurate tool if it's not applied correctly. In triplicate, with controls, with nested primers, with multiple amplicons.
I've been wanting to. I've watched some interviews with him. He seems like a really cool dude. He was a surfer.
He was a surfer, sadly died right before the pandemic, but
and he hated Fauci.
Yes, I think anyone who gets their nose into the space will come to the same conclusion as him. So it's unfortunately, if you're in the public, he's elevated as some almost Jesus level saint, but if you see what he actually does behind the scenes, he is the exact opposite of that. So the pandemic comes along, they're abusing these PCR tools, and I make note of this. I write a paper about it, and of course it gets attacked.
We will discuss that paper after this video, but that paper is the Corman-Jorston report, and it is a paper where 10 objections to the WHO PCR test were made by Kevin McKernan and a few scripted actors who are very significant to put into their place in the narrative.
Goes to the typical, censorship and ridicule that you expect, and shortly after that I think that caught the attention of Peter McCullough. He asked me to help write him a paper about the differences between the vaccines and the virus, which I went through all the molecular biology and how those two things differ. And after that happened, people start randomly sending me vials of vaccines to our address or company.
What prompted you to first write the paper?
Well, I could tell that since the PCR was a fraud, that when I saw what they were going to do with the vaccine, I'm like, this has not been tested. I know how that sausage is
vaccine
made. Yeah, my history of building DNA.
I know how that sausage is made. Okay, that's the admission that you need to hear. And he knew how that sausage was made because he dropped out of college and went to work for the Human Genome Project and helped to invent a lot of the technology that makes that sausage. That technology was developed by him and his teams. He's the research and development director of the Human Genome Project with no PhD. Worked under Mark Lander and Francis Collins. You know, Francis Collins. It's not by accident. It's one script and one cast. This guy is a very high-level clearance dude from the Department of Energy for already 2 decades.
Sequencers, man, I had a deep respect for when you start changing nucleotide chemistry on RNA molecules, you have no idea what you're doing.
Okay, he does sequencers. And therefore, changing methylations can mess things up. So already you can see that he's throwing you a red herring because this isn't the reason why it's bad. This isn't the reason why transfection is bad. It's not because it wasn't tested, which he just said. It's been well tested. It's been used on the academic bench for a decade or more in many different forms, in cell cultures of all kinds and in experimental animal protocols of all kinds to express proteins and knock them down and interfere with them and change the expression of or knock them out. And even the creation of knockout mice requires this kind of transfection technology to be used on zygotes. So we are talking about a technology that it's well understood, including the limitations of it. And yet he is scripted in 2024, right before the election, to go on a huge podcast and tell 2 hours of nonsense like this. And I, unfortunately, am trapped as one of the few people on earth who can debunk this guy because I have personal interaction with him for 5 years, where he tries desperately to get me to accept some of this rudimentary bullshit that, unfortunately, because of my training and persistence, I have seen through it. They have had so much of a problem with me that at one point in time, I was asked to present to Kevin McKernan, Jessica Rose, Stephanie Seneff, and John Bodwin all at the same time so that they could critique my infectious clones critique of the pandemic and RNA virology. And afterward, that guy wrote a Substack to say that I'm chemtrail retarded. Now, this is a man you need to understand as being one of the planners behind this multi-decade script, this long con, where using a fake pandemic based on background signals being misconstrued as spread, using intellectual property in the form of diagnostic tests, could be used to bamboozle our kids to believe that RNA can pandemic, and therefore the next one, they might want to be first in line for a frickin' shot, like Bill Maher said.
And that's what they did in the vaccine, is they changed every single uracil out with pseudouridine. And that completely changes the function of that RNA. And these guys just said, oh, we're just going to change all of them and then inject it.
And of course, this is a mistake because it's not pseudouridine. Pseudouridine is still technically natural. It is N1-methyl pseudouridine, which is an analog base. It's not natural. And they codon optimized it, which means they also changed the way the whatever RNA they purported to have found would be functionally expressed by ribosomes, because they changed the wobbling codons to codons that were happier in humans, that are more common in humans. And so there's so many things that they've done that this guy's not pointing out would lead to potentially a different antigen being present in the body, and a different antigen supposedly instructing the immune system. And none of those incongruities are being delineated here. He's not explaining any of that. He's going so short through the corner that it almost seems exactly like what Huberman said, which is, there's RNA in it. If it wasn't for RNA, we wouldn't be here right now.
And see what happens. And you change that one methyl group in the course of trying to build DNA sequencers, and your whole sequencer will fall apart. I mean, it's the enzymes are that sensitive to a single methyl group being placed on some of these pieces of DNA. You put 800 of them on the RNA that you're doing, you are in completely unknown territory with how that RNA is going to fold, how it's going to be processed in the cell, the RNA interference pathways it's going to kick off. So when I saw what they're doing, I'm like, this is complete reckless insanity that they're doing, and no one's raising their hand.
Him saying RNA and interference pathways is also pretty funny, because he's still not telling you that the contamination of fragmented RNA that was an inevitable result of using recombinant DNA to manufacture the plasmid that would result in the RNA, that whole concept is being omitted here, that there's a whole tail of RNA fragments that are much more likely to interfere with random endogenous regulation of RNA and protein expression than any of the full-length RNAs are going to do, because they're most likely going to get garbled up into a tertiary form that, does whatever it does, but it's less likely to interfere with regulatory ways because it's not short enough, and it will have a tertiary structure that won't allow it to bind to other RNA transcripts the way that small RNAs will. In fact, there's a whole synthetic technique on the the academic bench where they use small RNAs to interfere with endogenous RNA expression. And so he's also mentioned it, but hasn't mentioned why that's there. And again, that is a contamination that he knew would be there from a long, long time ago, because he knows how these methodologies work, and he knows the limitations of them and why they're good for making protein biologics, a lot less good for making a large batch of pure RNA. And this guy is behind Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And so he's part of this malevolent trap that this fake populist conservative right trap that we've fallen in. He's part of it, a very big part of it, like a high-level Department of Energy part of it.
About it, which is frustrating, because you're in a field and you look around and none of your peers are talking about this, and,
right.
And you're like, is everyone in on this? Like, what's going on? And being in Massachusetts, pretty much everyone is in on it. Pfizer's there.
It is equivalent to a silent mutation, and silent mutations, as you are well aware of, can make drastic changes in the protein function. And so again, he's not telling the truth here when he just glosses over that.
Moderna's there.
Oh, really?
I mean, the PCR companies are all there. So it's a breadbasket of people benefiting from the pandemic.
So basically, of comparing how sloppy the PCR test would be to measure this, you assumed that they were going to be way off with the vaccine. Is that a good way to sum it up?
Yeah, I could see that there was a game going on here to pump up the pandemic's risk so that there would be a need, a public desire for a vaccine. If you actually paid attention to how the PCR was behaving and how they were overcalling this disease, you would have barely noticed this pandemic. The COVID pandemic that came through was predominantly human-induced death. It was not that people weren't dying from the virus. They're dying from people's reaction to the virus. Like they're putting them on remdesivir, putting them on ventilators, taking away antibiotics, not letting them use ivermectin. There was all types of...
See, isn't that funny? You got to throw in the bullshit in there with the real stuff. Not letting them use antibiotics, not letting them use ivermectin. Stop lying! I mean, that's really awful, but it's real. That's where we are. He is a scripted theater actor for the national security state, and he fooled a lot of us, ladies and gentlemen, a lot of us. So here's what I got to offer you. In 2013, in Nature America, in the patent section of the reviews, a paper by the name of Dreaming of Patent-Free Human Genome for Clinical Sequencing was first authored by Kevin McKernan, where he's talking all about the intellectual property of patenting genes in 2013, especially with regard to diagnostics, which not just for genetic diseases, but of course also for communicable diseases in cannabis and in people. And so this guy is exactly on script in 2013, a couple years before ICANN would be established, a couple years before Robert F. Kennedy Jr. would pivot from mercury in fish to anti-mercury in vaccines with the help of Brian Hooker and Meryl Nass and Mary Holland, his handlers, and Robert Malone. And at the beginning of 2020, in actually November already, when the first wave of murder was over and the second wave was starting, a curious paper for open review shows up on the internet, and it is by the first 5 authors are all scripted weirdos. Peter Borger is a Dutch guy who has a new biology book that doesn't really question the old biology, but kind of does. And he, more importantly, has blocked me a long time ago. Bobby Rajesh Malhotra was a very weird, interesting actor. At some point in the pandemic, he was even promoting my review. But now he thinks I'm, I guess, CIA because I sell T-shirts that say New World Order or something like that. Mike Eden, of course, is a longtime pharmaceutical executive who knows exactly how protein biologics are made. More importantly, he knows exactly how recombinant DNA would be used to make this RNA and how flawed that process would be from the very start, just like his co-author Kevin McKernan would have known, just like his co-author Claire Craig of the 100,000 Genomes Project, and now the HEART organization that is also linked to PANDA through Jonathan Engler. All of these people have been in my direct messaging, texting my phone, some of them texting my wife. This is gross. The last author on this paper is the lady who provided the cell cultures that Kevin McKernan supposedly sequenced to show that the Pfizer SV40 vaccine, or the SV40 promoter, was in the vaccines. Like, this is frightening. This should be so obvious to you now. And if you read this, you will see that none of the 10 fatal problems here suggest that PCR can't be used. Just like none of the problems with the patenting here suggests that you can't patent a PCR test. In fact, this paper makes the argument for how exactly you can patent a PCR test for a genetic disease or a infectious disease. And now here's the guy whose friend and family and colleagues are all right in position to do it, right in position to control the narrative, who in frickin' April of, or maybe even March of 2020, was on a podcast called the Vance Crowe Podcast, a guy who used to work for the World Bank, talking about how PCR in America is being held back because the FDA is in the way and the EUAs require 10 pages of useless paperwork. It is impossible that Kevin McKernan is where he is, saying what he's saying on podcasts then and now, unless the entire thing was an orchestrated long con theater from Trump 1 through Biden through Trump 2. And the way we aren't seeing it is because there's still people who think that this was a flip from red to blue to red again, and it wasn't. Ladies and gentlemen, endemicity is a myth that everybody from Ralph Barrick to Kevin McKernan has been scripted for decades to make us believe. Everything from Hollywood movies to X-File episodes have been scripted to make us believe that endemicity is real, both as a process and as an endpoint, and it is not. Just like using PCR with a pair of primers on this background is not a specific test. Just like using their PCR test to find their ghost doesn't make their ghost real, nor does it make you a ghostbuster. It makes you a fraud. It's murder and lies, ladies and gentlemen. That's what you got to see. It's murder and lies because it's for grandchildren of Earth. I don't know how long I'm going to have to keep saying this because these shows are starting to become so sharp, they stand on their own. I might just be able to leave them and move on to the biology. Wouldn't that be great? Just give me a few more weeks to get the book complete and ready to go. And then the first little thing will be released. I'm really excited, ladies and gentlemen. It is a hamster wheel. I mean, you got to see it. We have people saying, thank God for Donald Trump. He's the answer to our prayers. We have people on our side who say that they've been fighting the vaccine schedule for 25 years because God told them to. We have people on our side who are lying about the Creator and their ability to communicate with Him or get answers from Him. Alex Jones is on this side. Sasha Latipova's daughter Soph is on this side. There's no way this is real. And of course, the spectrum of gender is absurd. Of course, transitioning kids at 14 with puberty blockers is absurd. Of course, Donald Trump isn't a genius. I know you can see through it, ladies and gentlemen. I know our children can see through it. I know we're going to get out of this. I just know it. I just know it. I know. I feel it. I feel there's going to be a break. I feel like this national security theater is about to end. I feel like that our work on PeerTube is really paying off. I think everybody is finding it enjoyable. So if you haven't tried it yet, take the leap. You can always delete the app if it doesn't work on your phone. You can always delete it if you think I'm full of bull. But try to get far enough to where you got Gigaohm on your phone and played one stream or watched one so you can see how well it works and how easy it works and how free it works and how anonymously it works. Thank you very much for being here.